Reporting to the clouds. Off we go. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this talk on Humanure composting with Richard Moore, who I feel is one of New Zealand's experts on this topic. And I've sent in some questions, and we will just let him speak as long as he feels like speaking. And at some point, I may say, Richard, enough. We're all tired. We'll carry on another day. So thank you for your time, Richard, and I'll let you introduce yourself.
I'm Richie Moore. I've had a composting toilet of various iterations, all built by myself for the last quarter century. And I'll tell you, that gives you a certain perspective on toilets. You could say one knows one's shite after having done this sanitary engineering for a quarter of a century. Anyway, let's rock into it, and I want to show you some pictures to get you focused on the real issues to do with composting toilets. So if I share my screen here, first I want to just get the right image up. Right, and now when I'm talking to the general public about composting toilets, I always refer to me being very much similar to this guy. This is General Ripper in Dr. Strangelove. He didn't want the communist infiltration to sap the impurity of our bodily fluids. And so, yeah, I'm crazier than General Ripper and Dr. Strangelove. Now, we're doing this on technology, so let's look at legacy of Windows, for example. In 1985, Windows 1 was brought out, and then various legacy steps in this technology have progressed over time, as technology does, until we get to the technology of today. And I think when you look at how far technology has come since Windows 1 in 1985, you realise how capable technology is of changing. The problem we have is here we have toilets designed by Queen Victoria's plumber, Mr. Thomas Crapper, in the 1860s, more than 150 years ago. In fact, the whole Industrial Revolution ago, the whole issue of the emissions we've released into the atmosphere ago. Crikey. Now, what surprises me is that when you look at the Victorian bathroom and the modern bathroom, all right, there's the legacy component. You know, we're still flushing the polluting stuff down the drain into the sewer with water. Where it goes, nobody knows. Some facts and figures about this system is that Wellington Water in our capitals region has a $1.9 billion budget for the next 10 years. In the district plan, it's asking for $7.5 billion. And for your Auckland is up there with more than 1.5 or 1. Anyway, the population of Auckland, well, Wellington is less than a third the size, less than 500,000. And we're talking $7.5 billion for 10 years. Now Wellington Water is forecasting its future demands on our ratepayer purse at north of $30 billion for 30 years. Crikey. And that's just to maintain this old legacy system that we have that was designed in the 1860s, and a lot of it hasn't improved much since then. And it's the reason it does is because every improvement is a patch up instead of taking an incremental technology approach of, well, we have to remain compatible with all the previous toilet systems going back as far as when Mr. Crapper first launched them. So when we compare it with our other waste that we create, you know, our normal approach to recycling, we've changed what we do. We just don't put everything in the rubbish bin anymore. We sort and separate our materials and we're trying to move to a circular economy, and we all spend a lot of time on the internet talking about circular economy stuff, and it's widely accepted that this is the future where we all want to go to. But at the same time, in terms of our liquid wastes and the wastes our own organism, well, we're busy pontificating about every other organism on the planet and what we should be doing. In terms of our own organism, our own self, we're busy flushing our own waste commingled down the public sewer. Crikey. Now, Auckland's just rolled out food waste recycling. If the public sewer is such a great place, why didn't we go for this? It's a pity you can't see that image a bit bigger, but that's an incinerator ad saying you need to use this 3 times a day, darling, and it's a magic piece of technology. Now, if it was as simple as putting our organic matter into the public sewer to flush it away, why did we roll out 30 million on curbside food waste collection? And the point is no, actually using the public sewer in that way would be abuse. So anyway, let's look at what we are actually flushing away. This is the pollutant content of domestic wastewater. So if you have a good look at it, all of the pollution largely comes from the human feces, the solid matter, the 70 grams of dry matter that you deposit every time you go to the toilet. By comparison, your urine, if it's separated at source and not just commingled down the public sewer, is almost an inert and sterile nitrogen fertilizer. And when you look at your other household activities of washing and dishwashing and laundry and all the other uses we have of water, they don't have much in the way of contaminants at all in terms of bacteria. And so essentially this whole use of water down the septic sewer is just to get rid of 70 grams of dry matter per day. So how much water are we actually using? Look at this. About 1% of the input into our civic sewer is the pollutant that we need to get rid of. So we chuck a whole lot of potable water in terms of the toilet flush, and potable water that we put in Mr. Crapper's 1860s designed water closet to create a water seal so you don't smell the sewer gas. And we put 6 litres of potable drinking water into the sewer to move those 70 grams along the council infrastructure. Crikey. Now, I've got a question for you. There's a hell of a lot of bright people in this world. I mean, Einstein, you got a guy back up at his rocket operation at Rocket Lab, Bill Gates, heaps and heaps of clever people. The funny thing is everybody on the planet uses a toilet 5 times a day. And we all use basically the same design. And what I'm amazed about is that if this system, in terms of what Mr. Crapper came up with, is so future-proof, and that all the greatest minds in history sit on it every day and use it, and nobody's come up with a better solution, well, crikey, that would make the public, the Mr. Crapper water closet the most amazing invention in human history. We should have a public holiday for Mr. Crapper's invention. We'd call it the Thomas Crapper Day. The point is all the clever people, and we can't come up with anything better. What is with that? So we either assume that this is the pinnacle of human development, you know, better than rockets, better than EVs, better than anything than Elon Musk is doing, because everybody's got one. Everybody, and the more developed and the more civilized you are, the more you spend on your bathroom renovation, and it's still essentially Mr. Crapper's water closet. From my perspective as General Ripper and Dr. Strangelove, I find it absolutely bizarre, and you're all crazy. But there you go. All right, so can we just pause the video while I line up the next images?
Yes.
I don't know why I can't. Okay, so we've taken the big view. We know that Wellington Water in the capital wants to charge us a small fortune for Three Waters. Three Waters has become a huge political issue. And globally, I gave you those figures. Now let's look at our basic water needs in New Zealand. If you assume you use the toilet 5 times a day and you flush 70 grams of dry matter of polluting excrement, and then you mix it with a whole lot of liquid waste and flush it down the toilet, we use 227 litres of water per day in a system which is largely polluted by that 70 grams. So we're taking 70 grams of material. It just, I mean, am I wrong? But it just doesn't make any sense to pollute 227 litres of water per day, just over 70 grams of dry matter, and particularly when Mother Nature's got a different approach. Right, sustainable water management. What does that mean? And the answer is there must be a better alternative than putting our excrement down the public sewer. So compost. The funny thing is if you take the excrement, the 70 grams of dry matter, and you just let Mother Nature have at it, and you optimize it so Mother Nature can compost it. She composts everything. I mean, in nature, everything composts. Even we compost when we die, unless we entomb ourselves and bury ourselves 6 foot deep. If things happened the way they were supposed to happen, in the forest would land on the ground, and a whole lot of microbes and organisms would take us over and return us through a composting process into the soil, from which the nutrients and that make us up have come from. So this particular graph sort of looks at aerobic composting from a temperature point of view, and assuming everything else is optimum. Now, talking about excrement before we get into this graph, if you're going to make excrement optimum for composting, one of the things is that it has a carbon nitrogen ratio of 8. And in order to get excrement up to the optimum composting ratio of carbon and nitrogen for aerobic compost, you need it to be at about a carbon nitrogen ratio of 25. So if you were augmenting your dry matter with something, say sawdust, for example, is a good carbon matter to throw on top of your composting toilet. Realistically, to get your carbon nitrogen ratio at 8 up to 25 with 70 grams of dry matter per day, you need about a litre of sawdust, which seems quite a bit, but it does give you a figure in terms of, well, if you're going to do this composting solution to get rid of your 70 grams, well, you're going to use 1 litre of some carbonaceous material every day. And so depending how long it takes to compost, you get an idea of the size of the bin that you're going to create to meet your composting need. And then if you have a family of 3, well, that's 3 people and 3 litres of sawdust and 3 deposits of 70 grams. And so you quickly come to the opinion that if you just do aerobic composting at the normal everyday temperature of just putting it in a bin and letting Mother Nature take its course, at ambient temperatures, as you can see in this graph, basically for half the year when your temperature is less than 10 degrees, the blue line extends beyond 20 months. In other words, we don't know how long it's going to take. And so the problem with that, with composting toilets, is if you take that approach to your composting, I'll just stick it in a bin and let Mother Nature take its time, it'll take a lot of time. And you're building it up at a litre for you and a litre for your wife and a litre for your kids every day. And pretty soon that pile is going to get pretty big. Now, the good thing about composting is it's exothermic. So done properly, it generates heat. And if you manage that heat properly, and I use an insulated bin, but the Humanure pile that's referred to by the Jenkins Humanure manual, it basically amasses a sort of like a square metre composting pile of Humanure and adds in your food scraps and other stuff. And the whole idea is to really get a furnace of heat going in the middle of that compost pile. And so the middle of the compost pile, the temperature gets elevated. And so the reason we know it gets elevated is because we have one of these, which is a compost probe. And you bury this into the middle of your compost pile and you can read the dially thing and know the temperature of your compost. Anyway, so if you look at excellence in aerobic composting, the Berkeley method, 65 degrees, a big compost pile, lots of organic matter, the right carbon-nitrogen ratio, the right moisture content, and it's all done within 18 days. And that's the amazing thing, that when it comes to your compost and your composting toilet, although most people tend to fixate on what they're sitting on, whether it's the bamboo loo with a bucket inside and a nice facade, but fairly basic sort of infrastructure, or the Nature's Head, or all the other different models. From my point of view, that's just the user interface. That's not really the area that we really need to concentrate on. At the end of the day, it's sanitary engineering, and this red line in this graph is the line between mesophilic, what's the word, Katrina? The word for compost organisms below 40 degrees compared to thermophilic ones above. Anyway, at 40 degrees,
would it be mesophilic?
Yeah, mesophilic. So once we get to 40, a different bunch of microbes take over. Now, thank goodness, and not until climate change does a whole lot of damage, the operating conditions on the Earth don't tend to be above 40 degrees in the normal situations we run into every day. But at 40 degrees and above, the thermophilic microbes that take over your compost pile, they are built for speed. And so when you look at this graph, you see that as you get the temperature of your Humanure compost pile hotter, the time it takes to process, every 10 degree elevation in temperature decreases the time by half. And so that is the secret to solving your issue of, well, how do I manage this litre per day? The point is put a bit of effort into how you're managing your compost piles and your bins. I insulate mine. I have an insulated bin, simply because just doing that increases the temperature by 20 degrees. That cuts the time it needs to stay in that bin down to 25% of the time if the bin wasn't insulated. The problem is the consultants who sell us composting toilet systems aren't really onto this sort of approach yet. They just sell you a box, and in my view, it's like the box that your smart dunny should come in. It's not really the I mean, just like the bamboo loo, for example, is a bucket and a nice enclosure. Well, you can take your composting pile, and with similar low-cost approach to the technology, you can put some polystyrene insulation or some basically any insulation that doesn't break down in a moist environment. And by insulating your bin, you will increase the temperature, and by increasing the temperature, you will get yourself out of the shite quicker. And that's something every sanitary engineering person really wants to do, and that's get the decomposition process done fast, efficiently, and quick, and ideally with not too much forking around. In order to get 65 degrees, you have to turn the compost piles quite frequently, and that's no forking fun. Anyway, so we'll look at the next slide. We've looked at that one for long enough. All right, now the other thing that getting your composting above 40 degrees does is pathogen reduction. Now, what makes sanitary engineering sanitary is that when we went back to the original justification for Mr. Crapper's water closet, the original justification was, well, if we flush it away, we can somehow improve the public health. And so the whole reason for sanitary engineering, the whole reason why council systems require a registered plumber drain layer to interface with them is because it's all about the sanitary part of sanitary engineering. And in my view, sanitary engineering is about ensuring the pathogens are killed in your compost. Now, let's talk about pathogens a bit. One of the things about a community like your family who are using a common composting toilet, and then you're putting all the waste in a compost pile, and then maybe after 2 years, or if you're using a hot composting, maybe after 6 months, because you know the pathogen killer's been effective. But if you're then using it to put in your garden beds, oh, shock horror, yes, well, you can do that. And one of the things about pathogens is any group of people, they're your bugs that are in it. They're bugs that generated in your system. So you tend to have a resistance to your own bugs. Whether you can take your bugs, and a bit like COVID that we're doing at the moment, where we look at the wastewater system for the amount of COVID in the community. And so whether we can take all the bugs of everybody and mix them all together and then expose the population to it, that would be very bad. But in terms of your own little group, your own family, or the people who would use a composting toilet, you are to a certain extent dealing with the microbes that you're producing in-house. And so it's not as scary a deal as you would imagine. Also, when you look at this information here, you can see the difference between thermophilic composting. Salmonella, for example, dead in 20 hours at 60 degrees. E. coli, killed rapidly above 60 degrees. And so when you compare that with unheated aerobic digestion, or soil application, or any of the other technologies, one of the other big benefits for insulating your bin and getting that temperature up is it does a far better job of shifting the material's operating environment above that 40-degree line. And once it gets there, you're basically sending it to Mars. Because in the heat of Mars, a whole lot of organisms take over, they get rid of the pathogens, And then when you bring that composting back down from temperature, it finishes its process and the organisms burn out through all the organic material, turning it into humus. You're left in a situation where you bring it back to ambient temperature and none of those organisms can survive. So you're basically left with fairly sterile humus. And so then what you do is you get our friends, can you see these? Put them out. Our friends, the friendly little spilling it on my thing. Tiger worms. Now, tiger worms, you think they like vegetables? They actually love humus.
Can I interrupt you just for a second while you've got the chart up? When you were talking earlier that the percentage of what's in the sewers, it's like 1% human waste. All of these pathogens, when they're in water, we're essentially multiplying them by 100. Like the sanitation problem is 100 times greater than it needs to be, correct?
Yeah. The problem is that these human pathogens exist at the ambient temperature, inside our bodies at 36 degrees or whatever. I'd have to check with my daughter, the med student, where I've forgotten all this stuff from. Anyway, they exist at ambient temperature. And so if you put them in a lovely sewer line with a whole lot of other material and you send it to the sewer works and essentially you create an environment where it can multiply. And then if you dispose of it to ground in the environment and the sun gets on it and heats it up, but it's still in a soup of disgusting cesspit, essentially.
Okay, so we're not diluting those pathogens in water. We're actually increasing.
We're creating an environment for them to thrive.
Breed and increase. Okay, the other question I have, based on something you just said, it was around within a family unit, the pathogens are smaller than in the wider population. If someone's on a property like I am, where there are 3 households, would you recommend having 3 Humanure composting spots so that each family unit can be separate?
No, I think that's being a bit anal about it. By the fun. No, because we're talking about a small population, a group, a family, a group of 20, 30, a group of 100 people. It's your local environment. It's your local people. It's your sheer contact with them. So you're already exposed to whatever is afflicting them in a way. When you shake their hand and you talk to them and you greet them and all that, you're already exchanging pathogens in a way, not as directly as you do by fingering through their compost if you're a sanitary engineer in terms of maintaining the Humanure pile. But my point is that we do have a level of immunity in terms of our own germs within our own immediate surrounds because of the exposure that we're exposed to.
Thank you for letting me interrupt you. You were talking about worms, and we are going to start running short of time. So,
all right. Now, I just wanted to show you this graph because we wonder how far away could we have the smart dunny of the future. I mean, in an overview, it would seem that all we have to do is separate the solids, stick it in an environment where it's going to be kept at 65 degrees, stir it like a bread maker, and Mother Nature will deal to it in 18 days. Crikey. And this particular circuit that I use on my phone, because rather than using a compost probe, I have a $10 circuit in the composter bin that my toilet dumps into. And I don't even have to go out and look at the compost pile. I can see the temperature and it gives me a 15-day readout. I am basically looking at it on a Chinese server, and people say that the Chinese are monitoring our shit on the internet. It's true. It's true. Look at that. And I can, it keeps every 5-minute reading for 15 days, gives me lovely trend graphs. So I can look at it and see whether the temperature in the compost is going up or down. And that's for $10. You know, my view is that the smart dunny of the future, which separates the solids, composts it like a bread maker at 65 degrees, stirs it, adds in a bit of Katrina's pre-prepared composting goop to help the process along, because that'll do it no end of good. And takes the urine, and in my case I put that on straw bales because I prepare the straw bales for straw bale gardening. And last year, a 1 square metre bed of 3 straw bales prepared with the family's urine produced 12 monster-sized pumpkins, and those pumpkins were on the winter menu until only about 6 weeks ago here at Mar-a-Lago. And so, yeah, your urine, it's nitrogen fertiliser. And then the rest of the water that we have, if we take out the urine and the excrement, well, that's grey water. So the issues in terms of putting that through a fat separating chamber and then putting it out in a reed bed to solve that. And I have a grey water system here on the lifestyle block that just basically cascades the grey water through some IBC bladders that I've cut in half, and it just steps them down, and the water flows from one to the next, and they're filled with scoria and planted up with carex grass, and gets to the bottom, goes into a pod, and it's got frogs and insects and the whole Mother Nature pond ecosystem. And I figure if that's where it ends up, it's not going into a stream, it's not going into the ground, it just ends up in a pond. And then I bucket it onto my trees in summer to keep my trees nice and watered, because we all know if we take the excrement and put it around the humus after it's composted and after the worms have introduced fresh microbes, and then we put it around the tree, that we plant trees to save the planet. And we green our built environment. And instead of being a polluting thing that we're putting into the sewer that ends up as sewage sludge in our landfill, we take an organic material that came from what we eat and all the goodness of Mother Nature, we turn it back to the goodness of Mother Nature, put it in the soil and plant a tree, save the planet.
Fantastic. As we wrap up, I know you have shared loads and loads of tutorials over on Facebook on how to make an insulating compost enclosure.
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to tell people how to get in touch with you, where to find your designs, and just basically for the people that are going, okay, I want to get into this, what's their first step?
The first thing anybody looking at composting toilets should do, the Humanure manual is the Jenkins Humanure manual is the Bible for hot composting, because if you understand what we've been saying today, that it doesn't matter whether you're using a bucket, and I mean in an emergency, in an earthquake, the local regional council tells you that you should use a 2-bucket system. I don't know how after a big earthquake I'm going to be able to control my sphincter to move from 1 bucket for the solids to 1 bucket for the liquids. So I would recommend an improvement on the council's 2-bucket system, because I'm good at sanitary engineering, and that you get a flower pot that's the same size as the bucket, and you put the flower pot in the bucket, and then that will affect the solids liquids separation with much less stress on your sphincter after a magnitude 8 earthquake on the Alpine Fault or whatever they're preparing us to have these toilets with. But it's interesting that their emergency toilet has nothing to do with the system that Wellington Water wants to spend 30 billion on over the next 30 years, and that earthquake is going to completely bugger it up. So we will have wasted a large chunk of that 30 billion when that earthquake comes along. And I just wonder whether as humanity we've got this resilience concept. Anyway, it's something to think about next time you're interfacing with the WC, or in our case, the WCC, the Wellington City Council, about WCs, the water closets. Yeah.
Good. So, is Facebook the best place
for
people to find you?
Page. Yes, if you get on Facebook and you search Richard Moore and Hotbin in capital letters, Richard Moore Hotbin in capital letters, that'll bring you up or narrow down the posts of mine that you'll have to trawl through. And there's one in particular which has about 30 pictures. And in that particular post, I go through the step-by-step process of how I took a standard council wheelie bin and turned it into an insulated toilet receptacle for the composting process to take place in. And then I explain all of the finer elements of the clever various low-cost techniques like the temperature monitoring system and how I stop the gas from coming up, or the rather than electric fan that a lot of composting toilets have, I just have a flap on the end of the pipe. And this, basically, it's a compendium of all my clever ideas in terms of homemade composting toilets. It also talks about the little gardens that I use the straw bales for. And yeah, all good shite.
Excellent. Thank you. And for anyone who wants to get in touch with Richard without Facebook, I will pop your email address, phone number, other details in the description under the video. So with that, I will say thank you so much for your time. Okay.